Regarding the royal family of England, I have some concerning news. As an incredible turn of events takes place inside Buckingham Palace, royal shockwaves are tearing through the United Kingdom. My queen consort is her. In a startling turn of events, Prince William is said to have inherited the throne from King Charles. That's not all, though. The royal title of Queen Camilla has been revoked. Freely. Let us not become, please, leaving the public and the monarchy in complete shock. Why would Charles have taken such an extreme and momentous action? Today we reveal the explosive truths, shifting royal authority, and secret tensions that have led to this unparalleled royal upheaval, the coronation in silence. It took place behind the gilded doors of Buckingham Palace in silence, almost in secrecy, an event that would permanently change the trajectory of British monarchy. No balcony waves, no trumpets, and no prepared smiles for the cameras. Just a thick silence that held on to the atmosphere like a cloud. King Charles III sat motionless in the throne room, revealing the tempest within of him. Then, slowly and deliberately, he stood up and held out the crown to his oldest son. Tradition was not his compass. Neither the palace courtiers nor Parliament exerted any pressure. It was an urgent, intensely personal choice that was made out of clarity rather than weakness. It was time, the king had determined. He gave Prince William the throne without making a formal speech or issuing a royal proclamation. Despite its simplicity, the gesture had generations of weight behind it. Camilla stood quietly to the side. Her face was a graceful mask that covered up the tremor underneath. She had been by Charles' side for years as queen, the companion who had withstood criticism, quiet, and turbulence. However, she was only an observer at this time and not the queen, consort, or ruler. She had lost her influence in the silence of the throne room. The court froze when Charles embraced his son. Senior aides looked at each other doubtfully, astonished by the silent protest against the formalities of the royal court. 1,000 unspoken words were spoken between father and son during that one hug. One king was taking a stride back, while the other was taking a step ahead. This was a surrender, and a transfer of authority carried out with purpose rather than show. It was not a ceremonial. Charles' hands did not waver. However, his eyes glistened with finality rather than weakness. This was his farewell, he knew. William was slow to speak. He approached the crown cautiously and gently. His eyes were filled with quiet resolution rather than hunger. His eyes were focused on his father, the man who had once carried the weight of a crown but had now decided to put it down, rather than the diamonds or the throne. William felt the weight of duty bearing down on him, yet his quiet was one of preparation. There had been a change, not just from one king to another, but also from one period to the next. And as she stood on the brink of history, Catherine's poise and composure mirrored the power of the new era she was stepping into. The monarchy was changing, not collapsing. What the walls already knew was validated by the palace hours later. Queen Camilla's title had been removed, according to a well-crafted statement that was devoid of passion but packed with consequences. She would now be referred to as Queen Consort Emerita, a ceremonial title that is symbolic but devoid of any authority, responsibility, and influence. She cleared her calendar. They quietly dismissed her workers. Her headpiece, removed in secret within her chamber, rather than in front of cameras. There was only stillness, no controversy, no uproar. It was a graceful erasure of the woman who had once struggled for recognition. With grace, purpose, and completeness, her chapter had come to an end. And how could a queen who had previously been at the epicenter of controversy and tumult disappear so subtly, leaving her legacy in silence? The last bow of the king. There was a final, private, and historically significant talk before the crown ever touched Prince William's head, before the cameras could flash, or before the rumors could reach outside the palace walls. Charles III, the king, asked to see Camilla alone. Only two individuals who have endured decades of scrutiny together, no counselors or attendants. What transpired between them was neither an apology nor a command. It was something far more straightforward and definitive. He informed her that it was time. The complete weight of a marriage, a legacy, and a reign was contained in just 2 words. Camilla remained silent. She didn't beg. Only those who have endured constant scrutiny from the public may appreciate the kind of weary grace with which she gazed at him. Her mouth quivered. Her voice didn't, though. "I get it," she muttered. Murmurs had been rife in Buckingham Palace's hallways for months. Rumors circulated about the king's deteriorating health, his growing desire to take a break before duty took up what little serenity he still had, and his weariness that no medication could cure. Others claimed it had to do with his health. Others thought it was about allowing William to lead without hindrance. In actuality, however, neither planning nor politics played a role in Charles' choice. It was about his own, and the country's tranquility. He had waited for the crown all of his life, and then carried it for years. All he wanted now was for the monarchy to survive throughout his lifetime. This was a father's silent surrender for his son's future, not an act of abdication brought on by failure. The impact of that last private decision, which was taken in whispered honesty rather than in public display, would extend well beyond Buckingham Palace's boundaries. Charles then moved out of the spotlight, not shattered, not battered, just finished. The moment's weight changed. With everyone's attention on Prince William, the once tense room seemed to be suspended in silence. The crown rested on its cushion. It was shiny, polished, and almost eerie in its quiet. He made no attempt to grab it. He stopped, inhaled, and then turned to face his father, the guy who had just given up everything. There was silent acknowledgement instead of cheers or a triumphant anthem. William approached the throne with a calm, methodical elegance. Every step he took seemed to be echoed by the footsteps of the Queens Elizabeth, George, and Edward, who had already endured the same unachievable load. However, it felt different this time. His eyes showed just duty and love, not hunger or any sign of victory. He didn't raise the crown high or bow deeply when he eventually accepted it. He just stood, motionless and solid, as if he were absorbing the storm that was now his. History seemed to hold its breath, as the air itself seemed to pause. Catherine rose tall from the corner, her presence exuding silent might, and her face composed yet ferocious. She commanded the room without ceremony or jewelry. The monarchy was in dire need of a modern spirit, which she already possessed. Camilla, who was once in the center of the drama, watched from somewhere behind the velvet drapes, now disappearing into its periphery. However, what caused the once controversial woman to become the mute observer of her own demise? Was this silent justice or fate? Continue to observe. The silent way out. Camilla took her last steps as queen, while Prince William took his first cautious strides into the throne. No statement was made, and no cameras flashed, no well-crafted goodbye address to the country. It happened quietly, in a dignified, controlled, and almost eerily serene manner. Camilla bowed her head, and gave a tiny, elegant curtsy in the magnificent room, where kings had risen and fallen for centuries. Even though it was brief, it had the force of a whole rainstorm ending, not from spectacles, her eyes gleamed, but from comprehension. This moment meant something to her. Official appearances, royal responsibilities, and a position at the heart of the monarchy's never-ending beat would all disappear. She had lost her title. Her name was subtly changed in palace records, and her power was removed. Nevertheless, she maintained her stance with a silent sense of pride, displaying the same self-control that had initially made her so divisive. No assistants were running at her side, and no photographers were yelling her name. As she strolled alone, the enormous hallways of Buckingham Palace, which had once been bustling with ceremony and footsteps, began to reverberate quietly. With the same resolve that had characterized her path, she discreetly exited the royal spotlight after entering it in a contentious manner. This time, however, her stride was devoid of defiance. No role left to defend, no need to fight. Witnesses within the palace described her calmness. She didn't stick around to see the ceremony continue. The throne, that had briefly held her name, was not the first thing she looked back towards. Rather, she left in a composed manner, her presence disappearing down the marble corridor, like a memory vanishing into the past. She was gone for good. In a deliberate and highly symbolic move, she was never again referred to as Queen Camilla in royal correspondence. She was only referred to as Queen Consort Emerita after that day, which is a graceful title that is formal and gentle but lacks substance, a term intended to commemorate without inviting, to honor without including. For many years, she was one of the most contested women in Britain. She was ridiculed, defended, and judged, and her every action, appearance, and word was scrutinized by the public. However, that glow had now faded. Her name, which had previously appeared frequently in news reports and discussions, started to fade. She was no longer able to use the public platform that had previously defined her life. There was something poetic about the hush that ensued, despite the fact that her presence was subtly removed from the monarchy's story. There was no scandal or commotion around her departure. It was poised, elegant, and nearly regal in its self-control. She departed as a lady who accepted her fate rather than one who battled for it. But one invisible moment changed the course of history just before she disappeared within the castle walls. What actually took place, and why? Join us as we uncover the unseen goodbye. The cameras moved away as the royal audience started to disperse. Once the ceremony was over, and the weight of history had subsided into silence, the echo of centuries-old custom was muffled by the smooth closing of Buckingham Palace's gilded doors. However, something unexpected happened behind those doors, an intimate moment that few people even observed, and nobody had planned. Freshly crowned, and still processing the enormity of what had just happened, Prince William left the opulent halls and cheers. His face was composed but contemplative, as if there was something unfinished hanging in the air. He discovered her along a silent hallway, away from the niceties and the prying eyes. No guards announced him. Camilla. Aides did not follow. There was no palace planning or etiquette behind the encounter. It was an impromptu, intensely human encounter, the kind that royal history seldom documents but never forgets. Two paths that had long run parallel, finally intersected for the final time in that quiet hallway. The scene was characterized by witnesses as delicate yet controlled. William walked in a sort of silence. His expression was neither victorious nor frigid. He wasn't there to apologize or confront. He realized that this was the time to complete the circle, despite all of the upheavals, disputes, and wounds that had molded their family. Their entire conversation went unheard. Those who were close enough to see it have remained extremely cautious, and the palace has never disclosed any information. However, one source, which spoke in fragments, used the word healing to describe it. William is said to have given a tender, spontaneous, yet profound embrace. The gesture was not appropriate for a royal ceremony. It was something much more straightforward. It was a person. For the first time, there were only two people standing on the brink of a conclusion, without any crowns, titles, or expectations between them. Camilla answered in a low voice that was hardly audible above a whisper. "Look after them," she said. Her meaning was clear to everyone who heard. She was talking about someone else. The weight of a lifetime spent next to a man who had recently relinquished his throne was evident in her comments. She was referring not only to Charles, but also to the family, the brittle institution that had once characterized her. It was a brief moment. No cameras were present, a gentle nod between two people who have shared the same world, but rarely the same peace. Instead of grandiose gesture, it was final when they turned away. Neither turned around. Few people ever see an ending like that. Silent, little known, yet incredibly meaningful. The old monarchy and the new one met in that shadowy hallway, not in conflict, but in comprehension. A lengthy, intricate period of royal history, also disappeared as their footsteps went in different places. How, therefore, did a single, silent, unnoticed, unheard, and unfilmed interaction between two royals cause a global uproar? Hold on tight, the global ripple. The world appeared to come to a halt when Buckingham Palace issued its formal announcement verifying that Camilla's royal title had been revoked. Then it erupted nearly immediately. What had quietly transpired within the royal walls was suddenly thundering over televisions and social media feeds worldwide. Hashtags like New King William and Camilla Stripped started to rise in popularity around the world in a matter of minutes, igniting an online firestorm that was impossible to control. The responses were swift, unfiltered, and sharply split. Some saw it as poetic justice, the eagerly anticipated resolution to a tale that had included royal drama over many centuries. The silent departure of a lady who had faced decades of public criticism struck some as more solemn, even tragic. Emotion, adoration, hatred, pity, and vindication were all abundant in the comment sections. One message echoed an old sentiment that had been heightened by finality: she was never meant to be queen. A graceful exit, no scandal, no spectacle, just closure, another user remarked. The complex atmosphere of the occasion seems to be encapsulated in just few words. This was more than just a royal reorganization for many. It was the poignant end to a story that started in the most volatile periods of the modern monarchy and continued well before William's coronation and Charles' accession. All of the memories, disputes, and tears from that royal tale seem to come back at once. Regular programming is interrupted by television networks around the United Kingdom, covering the breaking news by skipping planned broadcasts. With their words laced with bewilderment, royal correspondents frantically tried to make sense of it. Live panelists argued about whether this was a silent exile or a smooth transition. The headlines of international media sources swiftly followed suit, oscillating between astonishment and praise. By evening, the conversation's tone had changed from indignation to introspection. Once more, the royal family had turned into a reflection of the feelings of the country, a mix of admiration and exhaustion, disdain and compassion. The silent dignity with which William and Catherine stepped forth was greeted as a sign of stability. Their serene demeanor was characterized as a new age of moderation, a generation prepared to restore confidence in a society that had grown tired of controversy. Nevertheless, Camilla's absence was the one that remained most prominent in the public mind, even as attention shifted to the new king and queen. Even without a title, her name had an odd weight that could be heard in every headline. In the royal narrative, she had been the most defended and the most criticized woman, but suddenly, she was neither. The public's outrage was only heightened by the surprise of King Charles' quiet retreat. It seemed more like the end of an emotional chapter in a dynasty than a change of power. One fact became indisputable as the globe argued, rejoiced, and lamented in equal measure. The monarchy was irrevocably altered, and as the country looked on, a lady who had once been at its center was already vanishing into the background, her tale coming to a peaceful conclusion. One question remained: as the crown's radiance faded, had Britain seen a rebirth, or the silent demise of its most ancient ruler? Keep an eye out for the palace's final light. Long after the cheers had subsided, and the palace gates had shut, Camilla returned to her own room by herself that evening. This time, there were no cameras following her every move, no counselors waiting by the door, and no entourage. The sole sound in the room was the reverberation of her heels on the marble corridor, gentle, steady, and conclusive. The palace rested in the background. All that awaited her was stillness. As she arrived at her room, there was an odd silence in the air, as if the walls themselves were aware of what had just happened. She surveyed the area that had been her haven, where the fragrance of fresh flowers was brought in every morning by royal decree, and royal jewels glittered on the vanity. The blossoms have vanished. The gems had been tucked away in silence. Inside a velvet-lined cabinet, the diamond tiara she had previously worn with pride to state banquets lay, its brilliance tempered by the soft fabric. Both legally and emotionally, they were no longer hers, and no longer serve as reminders of her historical status. She only uttered one sentence that evening, according to insiders. She turned to face Charles, who was standing silently close by, and whispered softly, "Even though it was difficult, it was an honor. Only a lady who has experienced storms and learnt to not battle the sea could exhibit such calm acceptance." There were no tears, no dramatic movements, and no struggle. Her personal attendants had already started the silent task of removing her from royal life in the adjacent rooms. They cleared her private office. Calendar appointments were removed. Once sent to Her Majesty the Queen, invitations were later diverted. She told the courtiers, who had been with her for years, that their service was over. Her name seemed to have vanished from the letters, as if the world had changed. It was called a royal disappearance by one of the aides, not coerced, but definitive. It was elegant, purposeful, and extremely personal in every way. There was silence, no rumored rivalry, no media scandal, and no sign of embarrassment. Camilla didn't demand to be seen, or dwell on the past. She sat quietly for a long time, the faint glimmer of the lamps framing her reflection. The queen the world had discussed, defended, and examined, was no longer the woman in the mirror. She was just Camilla, quiet, unadorned, and content with her chapter coming to an end. She put her last piece of jewelry, a straightforward ring that she had worn to innumerable royal functions, on the table next to her, and exhaled deeply and steadily. Her rule had ended in silence, rather than in flames or shame. And how does the destiny of the monarchy change as a result of Charles' quiet retreat? Was this a tactic or a surrender? This is something you should not miss. It was the king who knew when to give up. When the time arrived, there were no trumpets, no throngs waving, and no worldwide broadcast of a farewell message. After reigning for years, King Charles III just quietly resigned, purposefully, and without opposition. There was no grand farewell or parade down the mall to commemorate his exit from office. Rather, it was kept secret in a father-son private discussion that took place behind closed doors and was spoken in hushed tones. It was elegant, it was peaceful, and it was definitive. Charles would no longer hold the throne after that day. Advisor Emeritus, his new title, had its own subdued meaning, a steady hand willing to lead, if called upon, but not a monarch, regent, or ruler. It belonged to a man who had put intellect before pride. He would not go to any significant state functions after that, unless specifically invited by King William, his successor. His once strong voice was a driving force in international discussions on social reform, architecture, and climate change, would no longer reverberate in formal environments. During his rule, the royal seal that had verified innumerable official papers was retired and kept as a memento of a past era. It wasn't a reign's end. A presence came to an end. According to those closest to him, the choice was not taken hastily or out of weakness or failure. As usual with Charles, time was crucial, about consciousness, about recognizing when the time had arrived. After decades of preparation for the throne, he started to notice something else in the peaceful cadence of his latter years, the following generation's readiness. He had observed William as a man, a husband, a father, and a leader who was influenced by both tradition and change, rather than as a prince. Charles recognized the steadiness the future required in William's strength. He perceived a new form of monarchy in his empathy, one that would be able to reconcile modernity with duty in ways that were before impossible. Therefore, he moved aside after fully comprehending what it meant. He was aware of the risk of remaining too long and becoming too recognizable to fade with grace. He was aware of the silent pressure that all monarchs experience and the weight of legacy. When history starts to hint that the moment has come, Charles didn't want to be known as the overly attached king. His goal was to be known as the one who knew when to let go. There was no tension in the air, no scandal, and no pressure from lawmakers. This was a handover formed of trust, a transition that was well planned and firmly anchored in love, rather than an abdication born of catastrophe. Love for his nation, love for the throne, and yes, love for Camilla, the lady who had supported him during decades of scrutiny and transformation. His rule may not have lasted very long in the grand scheme of things, but it had a profound effect. In subtle but enduring ways, Charles had brought modernity to the monarchy. He had mended old wounds, restored trust, and acted as a link between an aging tradition and a bright future. A fresh light emerged to greet the dawn as he positioned that bridge behind him. That day, Charles' legacy remained intact. He locked it. What hidden reality, then, caused Charles to cede power in such a covert manner? And how did the palace change as a result of that one decision? Inside the royal walls, a new rhythm. Buckingham Palace was not the same on the morning following Prince William's accession to the throne. The change was nearly palpable. Its old halls throbbed with a silent but indisputable heartbeat. The silence that follows a storm, but hums with fresh starts, was electric in the air. Earlier than usual, phones rang. Footsteps resounded more quickly. Once formal and relaxed, conversations were now hurried and quiet. There was no mayhem. It was precision, not fear, but control. A new rhythm has been established in the kingdom, and none was afraid to lag behind. Royal aides, many of whom, having held several positions, worked in unison. Only the clear coordination of those who were aware of history was taking place around them. There was no apparent stress or disarray. Doors opened purposefully, files were carried briskly, memos came in by the minute rather than the hour. This change was happening, practiced by some, and unanticipated by many, yet impossible for everyone. Then Queen Camilla's private office appeared, the first obvious indication of change. The once bustling center of her engagements had become quiet by morning. Staff members were called in small groups, their expressions a mix of calm and incredulity. She personally congratulated her longtime staff, who had supported her for years, through both modest triumphs and loud criticism. Many received offers of separate transfers within the royal system or early retirement packages. Some just bowed and walked away without saying anything. It was the way of the palace, courteous, accurate, but decisive. Her public itinerary, which had previously been packed with diplomatic receptions, gallery openings, and charity engagements, was abruptly cleared. No slow goodbye, no after effects. Camilla Zero was removed from the royal calendar in less than a day. Her patronages and charities were quickly restructured. Some transitioned easily to Catherine, Princess of Wales, who suddenly conducted herself with a fresh, quiet authority that everyone noticed but no one dared to mention out loud. Others melted into larger royal programs. By the middle of the morning, Clarence House had joined Buckingham Palace in the metamorphosis. The rooms where Camilla used to hold her private meetings were left empty. Personal mementos are meticulously packaged and labeled. Portraits are removed, and stationery is removed. A fresh crest shone above the doorway in their stead. The House of Wales emblem, symbols of rejuvenation, took the place of every file, emblem, and remnant of the previous order. Not even the most minute elements were overlooked. Overnight, the media staff was completely reorganized. Younger, more astute strategists, who were committed to William and Catherine's contemporary, simplified vision for the monarchy, took the place of long-serving press officers. The couple's taste for modern elegance over extravagance was reflected in the subtly altered uniforms, which had cooler colors and cleaner lines. What started out as a simple administrative reorganization turned into a comprehensive overhaul of the royal apparatus. In terms of tone as well as title, William and Catherine were now in the lead. They left their mark on every statement, invitation, and appearance. By the time the palace clock struck noon, one fact had spread over the royal estate like sunlight-piercing mists, proving that tradition had not disappeared, but had been recreated. The rhythm had changed. It beat fully to the sound of the future, and was sharper, quieter, and more assured. What was the secret meaning behind William's composed remarks now? Is it a silent warning to the old guard, or a promise of renewal? The crown was rewritten by the speaker. The moment the country had been waiting for came later that same week. King William entered the light to address his subjects directly, leaving the shadows where he had been waiting. No robe thick with history, no magnificent chair at his back. Rather, he stood in front of the flag of the country, a scene devoid of grandeur but rich in significance. It was straightforward, cutting-edge, and profoundly meaningful. Even before he opened his mouth, the message was obvious. There was a new kind of king. Even though the speech was short, each word had impact. William delivered his speech without the use of a teleprompter, notes, or ceremonial accoutrements. His steady, unrelenting gaze was fixed on the camera, as if he were communicating to each viewer individually, rather than to millions. His remarks were straightforward, but impactful. Togetherness, service, and love usher in a new era. The ensuing quiet wasn't uncomfortable, it was respectful. He started by expressing gratitude, honoring his father for his rule, as well as for having the foresight to resign, which is even more uncommon in royalty. William commended Charles' quiet fortitude, his bravery in letting go, and the elegance with which he handed the crown on. He then turned to Camilla and spoke in a calmer tone. He acknowledged her steadfast dedication during a time when support was limited, without pretense or fanfare. Simply, honestly, and truthfully, she deserves our gratitude for standing by the king when few others did, he said. However, the spirit behind it, rather than the script, was what really impressed the country. William's voice was measured, but incredibly human, forceful but serene. His voice was not that of a faraway figurehead, spouting lines from the royal court. He spoke in the voices of a father, a spouse, and a son. He steered clear of convoluted changes or grandiose political pledges. Rather, he made a singular commitment to listen, serve, and lead alongside the people, rather than above them. He remarked, "I don't wear this crown alone, I keep it for you and with you." The monarchy did not feel aloof or untouchable. For the first time in decades, even seasoned detractors stopped, recognizing a shift in his tone, a pledge that this reign will be about more than titles and customs, as well as warmth and humility. The message was clear by the end. Remember to subscribe, like, and share.